Peter, Nick, thank you very much. I had the good fortune to meet Nick in July of 2019, and he proceeded on doing the most extensive due diligence that anybody did on our company. And from July of 19 to January of this year, February of this year, when they made a commitment, it really made everybody on our team feel really good about it, because they really went through every inch of due diligence with us: patent lawyers, bariatric surgeons, endocrinologists, and the like. But let me give you a quick overview. I want to frame it because Dr. D'Amico, who is an investor and on the board as well, is going to get into the guts of what our technology is all about. Medality Medical is a privately held company. We've been funded to date by private investors and 2 National Institute Health grants. The first grant was for about $300,000 to fund our baboon study, which was a non-human primate study. And then the second one was for our first in-human trial, which we're doing a pilot trial right now. And it's a 10 to 12 patient trial being done in San Antonio, Texas. We've done our 4th patient will be done tomorrow. So our focus is in our company is really based upon a platform technology that was invented by our co-founder, Dr. Mark Andrew. Dr. Andrew is an ophthalmologist, and the original application for this technology was to remove cataracts. He licensed that technology to Alcon for the eye and kept the rest of the body for himself. We've had gone from the eye to liposuction, and I want to move to where we are today because I know it's getting late. Today our full focus is on type 2 diabetes. Why type 2 diabetes? Well, in the U.S. alone, we have 25 million people that have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Another 80 million people are pre-diabetic, and the statistics say within 5 to 7 years, that group of people, 35 to 40% of that group will go to full-blown diabetes. So it's a very serious market. Worldwide, there's over 400 million people with type 2 diabetes. It's a pandemic, and I don't think I need to tell anybody here what happens with type 2 diabetes: strokes, blindness, death. I mean, 270,000 people in the last couple of years died from type 2 diabetes. It's a very serious problem. So that's really our focus. And our technology allows us, which is really focused on fat removal, very unique way of removing fat, and that's how we ended up going from subcutaneous fat to now we go in and take visceral fat out of the mesentery. And this is where Dr. D'Amico is going to go, because as I mentioned to somebody before, I am not a recovering investment banker. I never got rid of the disease, so I let all the technical stuff to people that understand about the technical stuff. We've just completed a round, about a $6 million round. It was on a pre-money value of about $23 million. We are looking to do another round probably early next year, but we're holding off. We're well funded through 2022. However, we are looking at a pivotal trial. We are going to have to do a $25 or $30 million round. We are waiting right now to get more results, since we had our first patient was done in November of 19 in this pilot trial. Then we all got hit by COVID, and elective surgeries went into a moratorium. We didn't get our second patient done until March 31st of this year. Our third patient was July 14th, and now our 4th patient. So we're really behind the curve on our surgical piece of our trial. We're expecting to hopefully have it done this year with a 12-month follow-up, which would put us to the end of 2022 in terms of moving forward into the pivotal trial, and we're getting ready for that now, in fact. I rushed through it because I want Rick to talk. We've handed out brochures on little proposals, presentations on the company. I'm happy to address many more questions in terms of our clinical pathway, capital raising, and anything along those lines following our presentation. But I want to make sure Rick really goes through the technology with everybody here, because it is so important and so unique. We have lots of patents to cover ourselves, and we've just filed provisional patents for further protection on our procedures. No, I didn't get past the first slide. Sorry.
Thank you, Brian. I want to thank Nick and the family for having us here. This has been highly educational, diverse. My congratulations on the diversity. The other thing I hope you'll do is invite us back in 3 years so we can show you where we all are. And I think it would be interesting for each of us to see what happened to the others. I know these guys are getting together in San Francisco, but that's a long way. So Brian has already gone off script and it's late, so I'm just going to do what surgeons do. I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you why I think I can do what I think I can do. I'll show you the technology that I have, and then of course you can judge for yourself whether you want to sign up for any of this. So let me try to advance some of these slides and see if we can at least do that and get someplace where I can be happy starting off. So let's look at platform technology. So I think that we can cure adult type 2 diabetes. And more than that, I think we can cure high blood pressure, stroke, heart attack. And that's why I'm a practicing plastic surgeon, but I came here this afternoon to talk to you. So about 9 years ago, our founder was showing me this technology, and we were using it for liposuctioning the cosmetic peripheral fat that we do all day long. And I looked at this technology and I said, it's great and it's gentle and it's wonderful, but it's more than we need for the peripheral fat. And peripheral fat and mesenteric fat are completely different entities. Yes, they're both yellow, and it ends about there. So I looked at our founder and I said, you know, Mark, if you can get me into the viscera and the mesentery, we could change the world. And 5 years after that, he called me and said, Rick, the first baboon lived. I said, Mark, what are you talking about? He said, Rick, the first baboon lived. So he took his pre-diabetic, obese baboons, took out the mesenteric fat, and had great results. Well, we'll get to that, but let's look at the technology just very quickly so I'm sure that you understand it. There is a pointer on here, I believe. Good, and it works. So look, this is an FDA-cleared device. It has a 510K, so that's an incredible hurdle that's already been overcome. So what it is this is a kind of cannula we use to remove fat, whether it's peripheral liposuction or mesenteric fat. It's a blunt, hollow tube. It has an opening. Now, in the peripheral fat, the opening is sharp. We use powerful suction. We draw the fat in, and by moving the cannula, we shear it off. That's great in cosmetic liposuction, but it's way too aggressive for the mesentery. Mesentery is a much more dangerous place. It's difficult to operate. So what's different here, if you look at this area below, is that now inside this cannula, there's a separate tube that carries warm, low-pressure water. So it's warm and it's low pressure. And what happens is, with low suction, we draw the fat in very gently. This is not sharp at all. In fact, it's deliberately blunt. And what separates the fat from its milieu of connective tissue is this stream of warm water. And that's all. So it's gentle enough to remove a cataract from your eye. It's gentle enough to remove mesenteric fat. So there is no other technology that can do this with this kind of safety, with this gentility. There's no energy source that can do this. And God knows, in 38 years of practice, I've tried almost every energy source there is in the human body. Okay, so it's an FDA-cleared system. As we said, there's a handheld cannula. This is the business end of it. This is what goes into the patient. This is what goes into the fat. This is what draws the fat out. Then there's a disposable single-use pump that generates the pressure to move the fluid through the system. And of course, here's the control module itself. So it's FDA cleared, and as Brian will tell you, it has some pretty strong IP. The focus on type 2 diabetes, I think it's very clear. This is one of the devastating diseases in terms of non-cancer, non-neoplasia. What's killing Americans is diabetes. But I do want to take you for a minute, since Mr. Wolf made such a great presentation about food and how we need to feed the world. Really, what's at the core of all this is when we overfeed ourselves. And obesity is at the heart of this. And obesity is what drives this. And obesity is what drives the accumulation of mesenteric visceral fat. And remember, there's other visceral fat. Viscera refers to the internal organs, and any fat around the organs can be called visceral. And so what we're doing is the visceral fat in the mesentery, and I'm going to show you that too. But we started with type 2 diabetes because if we start there, we've really addressed the core of the problem. Because what does diabetes do? Well, this visceral fat has what we call paracrine effects. And that hyperinflammatory state that we've talked about in some of the other presentations happens here. M1 macrophages, which are highly pro-inflammatory, are secreting all kinds of things that eventually result in atherosclerosis, high blood pressure, stroke, cardiovascular death, amputations, infections, neurologic loss. Just in terms of perspective, if you're a diabetic and you get an open foot ulcer, your 5-year survival is no better than cancer. So this is life-threatening, quality of life destructive. And so what would be best is never get obese, never get overweight, and prevention. And you can see where that's getting us. This is increasing every year. So we have to do something to deal with it. And the beauty of this is that this is the core tissue that seems to be responsible for all of the metabolic effects that get us to the diabetic state. And those same metabolic effects get us to atherosclerosis. It gets us to coronary artery disease. It gets us to peripheral vascular disease and amputation. This seems to be the core tissue. And if you look at an MRI in an obese person with a BMI over 50, there's lots of visceral fat. We're starting with the mesenteric visceral fat, and let me show you that here. So if you remember anything today about this, it's this slide here. So if you look at this sort of reddish orangey fat, this is the peripheral fat that we can grab. It's what we do cosmetic liposuction on, and it's actually not bad at all for us, chemically or metabolically. We may not like the way it makes us look, but that's a different issue. The core here is this collection of mesenteric fat. And if you look here and here, I want to give you one more analogy. When you go to buy fresh fish at the store, you see the fresh fish is laid out in a case, and what's packed around the fresh fish? Ice, right? So if you go into a person who's thin and you open up their abdomen, what you're going to see is this, their intestines floating around in there. And what attaches the intestines to the wall of the body is this thin membrane called the mesentery. And that mesentery is full of lots of really important things, but it's also, in an obese person, just full of fat. So when you open up an obese person, instead of intestines, instead of the fish, you see the ice. It's just packed with fat, and you have to kind of get the intestines out of this. So this is what we don't want, and this is what we need to treat. And the collection of this fat, in particular the mesentery here, but also if you look at the space behind here, in an obese person between the spine and the intestinal organs, there's an area called the retroperitoneum, which then builds up tremendous layers of fat. This gets around the kidneys, and we think this is a root cause of what's called essential hypertension, high blood pressure. Everything we do in medicine is pills to treat things. These are root cause issues in these people with these BMIs. And if we can get after the mesenteric fat with this technology, we can also get the retroperitoneal fat. So this is just the beginning. The diabetes is the beginning of this in my view. You know about the cost. We won't spend any time on that. Everybody's on medication. You start with non-insulin. You go to one drug. You go to two drugs. And some of them, the newer ones, the GLP-1s, are helpful at mitigating. But nothing is curing this. Nothing. And what I also should point out about the baboons is that after a 15-month follow-up, which is a long time in baboons, there was no reaccumulation of this mesenteric fat once it came out. Because we're very hopeful that if it took 40 or 50 years to get there, If we can buy the patient 40 years, why, that's more than good enough. So here's the problem, and here's why this technology is so valuable. So this is a look at, this is intestine, and all this connection, the blood vessels, the nerves that keep the intestines alive, all run from the core of the body through this membrane, this mesentery, into the intestine. So if you are in any way aggressive or destructive in this area, you can actually kill off a segment of the bowel. And so heat, energy, cutting, those technologies are absolutely out. We need a gentle stream of warm, low-pressure water, and that's all we're doing here. So this is a very bad photograph of what it looks like, but this is the intestine here. Here's Dr. Peterson inserting the cannula into that fat that we talked about, this mesenteric visceral fat. The way it's done currently is what we call through a mini laparotomy, which is a little 1-inch incision around the belly button. The intestines are accessed that way. Before that's done, a laparoscope's put in to check to make sure everything is appropriate. The laparoscope is put back in after the fat's removed to make sure no damage was done. And that's the FDA protocol that we're working under right now. So Brian talked to you about the pilot trial, the NIH grant, and this is being done in Texas. The primary endpoint here is, of course, the absence of serious events. Remember, this is a human surgical clinical trial that was approved with only 7 baboons predating it. So the FDA really wants to solve this problem. So the improvement in glycemic control, in other words, the hemoglobin A1C, needs to come down sufficiently to justify the procedure. The secondary improvement will be in insulin sensitivity. What happens in diabetes is that basically in type 2 diabetes is that the body becomes resistant to the effect of insulin. And what this removal can do is to restore that insulin sensitivity, to take a diabetic into a non-diabetic. Patient 4 is being done tomorrow morning, as you can see. Patient 1 only had 30% of the visceral fat removed. That's not enough to make a difference. It was done to establish safety. This is the first time a human being had mesenteric fat removed. The team right now is unimportant. It's wonderful. So let me try to summarize for you. Medality has a patented state-of-the-art platform with the technology to remove not just mesenteric visceral fat, but retroperitoneal visceral fat and other visceral fat. 2,000 patients have been treated with this in peripheral liposuction quite safely. So we established that and had FDA clearance there. Obviously, we're the first company to remove visceral fat in human beings, and as I said, patient 4 gets done tomorrow morning. This is human first pilot. Obviously, there's going to have to be a pivotal trial after we get our 10 patients, and there'll be a fundraise at that point. But really, the excitement for me here is, one, I think we can cure, and cure is a big word in medicine, and it's a big, big word. But if we can get rid of this fat that's the causative tissue of all these issues, that takes us away from treating the tail of the dog with pharmacology and other things. So I think this is a core technology. It's the only technology that's been shown to be safe to do it. And I think assuming we can get the good results in these humans, the sky is absolutely the limit. So thanks very much.
Rick, let me just make 2 footnotes to
Sure.
something Rick said that I think is important. When we did the baboon trial, we did the baboons, but 4 of the baboons actually were pre-diabetic. They were insulin sensitive and insulin resistant. And within weeks of this procedure, they became insulin sensitive, which was really a big breakthrough for us. Importantly, all 4 of those baboons, as Rick mentioned, when we went back in, there was no regrowth of the visceral fat after 15 months. Jumping to the pilot trial, patient number 1, where 30% was removed for safety reasons, we actually they did an MRI on patient number 1 after 12 months. It's a 12-month follow-up after your procedure. Following that 12 months, they did an MRI, and he showed no regrowth of visceral fat either after 1 year. The sustainability of the procedure is very, very important. The cost of this trial for us, for a patient, is $15,000. You could see from the other trial the delta between the health care costs of somebody without diabetes and somebody with diabetes is about $10,000 a year. This procedure right now is $15,000 a year. It doesn't take much to figure out. If you get 2 or 3 years before you have to go back, you're way ahead of the curve in terms of dollars and cents. But we're seeing what we've been able to see in this short period of time is this no regrowth is very, 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 very powerful for us. I think that's really 2 points I wanted to make.
Good.
So over the years, I've noticed that the more I eat, the fatter I get. And I want to challenge you on the regrowth of the visceral fat. Why, if I'm a person that is eating food with abandon, isn't the visceral fat going to come right back? And then I have a second question after that.
Sure. Well, I think the obvious answer is yes. I mean, it's like when I do cosmetic liposuction on somebody and they say, what if I gain 50 pounds? Well, I said, well, you'll get fat. So yes, if you eat your way back into that visceral fat, at some point, you should be able to reaccumulate it because it's really overnutrition. It's just overnutrition. It's what the human body does with overnutrition. And the problem with this tissue is that it seems to reset your metabolism. It resets your satiety. So, people are always hungry. And it's
Have you gotten comments about satiety from the patients that had it?
too soon.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The comments about satiety from the patients that had it.
Well, and so, as I understand it, talking with some of the scientists you guys have worked with, is that the visceral fat in the mesentery is secreting many hormones and cytokines that are only recently being fully appreciated. I know, buzzwords like ghrelin and resistin that I can't say that I entirely understand, but there's a lot of emerging science that those secretions from the mesenteric visceral fat are governing your appetite and holding you in homeostasis, being hungrier than you need to be to survive. And that's what I find is one of the exciting things about the modality approach.
Let me answer your question a little bit differently also, Eric. The sustainability question of the procedure is really, really key, right? And so if somebody's at the point of type 2 diabetes, they might be 45 or 50, 55 years of age, and they've had a lifetime of this eating and growing visceral fat. If you can remove that visceral fat through this procedure, let's take somebody who's 50 years old, but it basically took him, let's say, from the time he was 15 till he was 50. That's a lot of years. So if you're at 50 and you're worried about, you have the visceral fat removed and sustainability is showing 3 or 4 or 5 years at least without having to redo the procedure, you're way ahead of the game.
I guess the follow-on question would be, you're going to need something sustainable and cost-saving in order to get reimbursement. And do you plan to take on morbidly obese patients, or are they too dangerous to begin with? I mean,
this trial is focused on people between 30 and 39. FDA mandated 30 to 39 for our trial, but when we go to the pivotal trial, we're actually having conversations. We work with a group called MICRA, who's our CRO. It's a device CRO based down in DC, and we're addressing that question right now, in fact, in terms of what the pivotal trial inclusion criteria will be, and we'd like to expand it. Because we're seeing, and we have a clinical recruiting firm as well, and we're seeing people coming in that want the procedure that have BMIs of 50, 55, 45, and they're 5'3" and 5'4". I mean, these are big people. So the idea would be that right now the FDA was concerned if you're too high on your BMI, you're probably too sick and and this is a safety trial. But that should expand in the next, as we get to the pivotal trial.
Right. I mean, risk is important here. undoubtedly. And the longevity of this is clearly going to be the core of what it does. But when you think about the other incentives, because you talked about yourself, why don't I just keep eating? The psychology of weight and the psychology of diet all comes into this. The secondary, tertiary advantage when you take out this dramatic, what gives us middle-aged men our gut is this visceral fat. And when you don't have that, I'm less likely, a lot of people are less likely to get out of those dietary habits. Then if we get improvement in the satiety sensors, that may also help us. But we have to do this to find out, and it's never been done. It's never been able to be done safely. So we now have the technology, we have the ability to do it, and so we're starting here. But when we get to this retroperitoneal fat that's around the kidneys, at some point this could go on and become a wellness procedure. All these people that you hear about who are 40 years old and dad died of a heart attack at 52, they have this family history. They do everything they can, and some of those people, they're thin, but maybe there's just enough of this to help them. But if they're not thin, we may be able to actually prevent this whole syndrome from happening. So I think the cost savings are there to the system, and I think that's why that's probably the only reason FDA gave us a human pilot trial after the baboons, quite honestly.
And Dr. D'Amico, tell me if I state this incorrectly, but in many respects, our bodies are optimized to survive famine. I know our people came through the Irish potato famine, and all of our ancestors experienced that. As I understand it, when you gain weight, if you put on fat below your waist, you grow new fat cells. As I understand it, when you gain fat above your waist, your existing fat cells expand. You don't produce new fat cells. You have a finite number of fat cells in the belly. And one unknown, but one very intriguing possibility coming out of your procedure would be that removing those visceral fat cells puts a ceiling on how much weight you could ever gain. Is there any truth to that, or is that too much of an unknown at this point?
It's almost enough. So, but let's take those two fat pools. We have to separate the peripheral fat, because that's where we have most of this information. And we still think that the absolute number of fat cells is pretty much stable. We know that adipose cells are incapable of incredible ballooning and storage, okay? So what you're getting at from peripheral fat seems to be true, that basically by taking these fat cells out, you're reducing the storage capacity. That's kind of what you're getting at. Whether this will happen in the visceral fat, once again, I can't stand here and tell you because nobody knows. Now, in rats, yes, but a rat and a human is still a pretty long stretch. The baboons are incredibly exciting because they're 99.4% us. So that's the real encouraging part of this. But you're right. If we're reducing the storage capacity, then now we're talking about a whole different scenario. And if it works, it's probably because of that.
So the little bit that we've seen with these types of things is that if we have a surgeon of your caliber, you could use this thing safely. But there aren't enough of you out there to be able to really treat enough patients. And so, a lot of companies have gone out there and said, well, we need to leverage whatever. So I don't know. I think we were talking about real-time imaging to even robotic surgery and other things to be able to really get this into enough people. And wanted your thoughts on that.
Sure. And I'm going to, with great hesitation, I'm going to say, great question. Because it is. This is obviously a delicate procedure with a delicate piece of technology in a delicate place. And it isn't for every Tom, Dick, and Harry surgeon that comes down the pike. Absolutely. Obviously, as this shows its value, we will work on the instrumentation and we'll make it an everyday procedure. I think it will be an everyday procedure. But right now it isn't. But it is not outside the expertise of good bariatric surgeons. And in fact, and I am not a bariatric surgeon, I'm a plastic surgeon. But my bariatric colleagues, we have these discussions. And so it is well within the realm of, within a 10-mile radius of where we're standing, there's probably 200 surgeons who could do this well. Not 2,000, but 200. So it's not that difficult. Now, I've been working with these cannulas my whole life, so I can tell you it's not that hard.
And let me, Rich Peterson, Dr. Peterson is our bariatric surgeon, how he would answer that question. He's done all the baboons, and he's done the 3 humans to date. His view on this is, 1, it'll be an outpatient procedure, and 2, it's no more difficult than repairing a hernia. It's just, the difficulty is in, and that's why the cannula is rounded, and the cannula is going to have a limited use, because if somebody cleans the cannula incorrectly and you get a little edge, you can't have a little edge when you go in there. You have to be very careful about that. But basically, he feels that this is something a general surgeon, a good general surgeon, will be able to do over time, not today, but we do have, and he has in his mind, a rollout of how you can start training the physicians as we go to the pivotal trial. Will probably be at 10 sites, expanding the universe of these doctors, and walking before we run. But this is the plan.
Yeah, talented laparoscopic surgeons basically will pick this up. That's who they are, and these are folks that can take your pancreas out laparoscopically. So this is not technically challenging. The technical challenge was to be able to separate the fat we don't want from this sheet of tissue and not disturb those nerves and blood vessels.